When a new product is launched, several branches of a company need to be trained on that new product. This includes marketing teams, salespersons, technical support, and of course, repair technicians. IBM provided this training through in-person training sessions and, in certain situations, service tapes for VHS players. These service tapes would be distributed to train personnel on troubleshooting and repairing the devices that they shipped. Generally speaking, these tapes haven't survived and can be very rare. This tape, which you are about to see, features a complete disassembly of the ThinkPad 701C as well as the hinge replacement procedure for the ThinkPad 700C. This tape isn't in the best condition, but as a historic artifact is still completely functional. It is provided unaltered as a historical object, an educational guide, and no ownership over the content is claimed. It has been uploaded in the hopes of preserving this information for future generations and research. Please enjoy.
Welcome to IBM's Service Training Series, Product Update Volume 4. I'm John Nettuno. This video will provide those of you servicing our ThinkPad products an inside look at a recently announced product and a new service procedure. Segment 1 contains the service information necessary to support the recently announced ThinkPad subnotebook Model 701C and CS. Some of the topics we will cover include product overview, maintenance package, assembly and disassembly tips. Segment 2 contains the latest service procedure for replacing defective hinges for the ThinkPad Model 700C and 720C. Ken Dunn from our mobile development team is now standing by in our service area, so let's look in on Ken and the latest subnotebook addition to the ThinkPad family.
Today I'd like to take you through the IBM ThinkPad 2630. It comes in two models, the 701C and the 701CS. First, I'd like to explain some of the features, then go through the diagnostics and configuration screens, talk a little bit about the function keys, and finally we'll do a teardown and rebuild. Now, the only physical difference between the 701C and the CS is that the 701C has a TFT screen. The 701CS has a dual-scan STN LCD. Both models can be configured with either a 486 DX2 50 MHz or a DX4 75 MHz processor. Both have internal math coprocessors. The DX2 comes standard with 4 megabytes of RAM and an 8K internal cache. The DX4 has 8 megabytes of RAM and a 16K cache. Both RAMs are expandable with either a 4, an 8, or a 16 megabyte, 70 nanosecond, 3.5 volt, single outline DIMM. Both models feature an audio system with internal microphone and speaker. It also has jacks for an external microphone, an audio in, and headphone speaker jacks. The audio system supports the Sound Blaster and Sound Blaster Pro applications. They both also support local and ISA bus architecture. They come with two preloads, either Microsoft Windows version 3.1 with a PC-DOS 6.30 base, or with OS2 Warp that includes full IBM Windows support. The dimensions and weight: the weight is 4.3 pounds with the battery installed. It's 1.7 inches tall, 7.9 inches deep, and 9.7 inches wide. I'll explain the rest of the features as we point them out. First, let's start on the side. We have one of two AC input jacks, the on-off switch. This is the cover for either the 3.5-inch floppy drive, or it can double as a parallel printer port. It has an internal modem, an internal data fax voice modem at 14.4K with complete telephony support. Here are the jacks for the microphone, audio in, and headphones. On the other side, we have the PC MCIA cover, a removable 360, 540, or optional 720 megabyte hard file, and this is the battery location. On the back, this is the IR window. The infrared transceiver is IRDA compatible and operates at 115.2K. This is the connector for either the multi-port 2 attachment, or with an adapter card, it can be connected to the Dock 2 expansion unit. Okay, the multi-port 2 attachment comes standard with the unit. It has on the back, has a serial port, parallel printer port, audio in and out jacks, an external mouse and keyboard ports, a second AC adapter source, and an external monitor. The attachment hooks onto the back of the system, sliding one end into the notch, and gently but firmly locking into place, making sure the release lever locks into position. To remove it, it's the exact opposite. For the bottom, we have the battery release latch and the SO DIM door. And inside the DIM door is also the pads to remove the customer's password should it be necessary. We also have the speaker opening. All right, and now for the good stuff. Let's go ahead and open this up. It has a full-size 11.5-inch expanding keyboard with quiet touch keys. It has the track 3 pointing device embedded. The video screen is both the 701C and the CS are both 10 by 10.4-inch color 640 by 480 screens. The 701C is a TFT screen. The 701CS is a dual scan STN screen. Okay, an easy way to tell, besides from the insignia, is the top screw on an STN screen is positioned down about 1/2 inch. The contrast and brightness are controlled through the keyboard function keys. Also on the front, we have internal mic location, the LEDs, and this is the keyboard pivot cam. Okay, we'd like to take just a minute here and show you some of the graphics capabilities. This is a TFT screen, and these are live pictures coming straight out of the Microsoft Windows screensaver program. It'll just give you some idea of the quality of the picture of the screen. Okay, from this point, we'll want to go into the diagnostics and configuration screens. To start with diagnostics, we'll need to power down. Diagnostics accessories, these are all standard diagnostic tools. This is an audio wrap plug, the serial cable wrap plug, parallel, and PCMCIA cards. You can use any, all, or none of these depending on the diagnostics you're running. In order to initiate the diagnostic screen, we power up the system, and during the post memory count, press F1. Okay, now we're into the easy setup screen. This screen is more or less standard across the ThinkPad line. The first box we can enter directly into the configuration screen. I'll talk more about the configuration screen later. What we want now is to get into the test screen. We can test any single section or all together. To initiate advanced diagnostics, it's a Control A, brings you up a tool icon that you enter into, and it asks you what of the external devices coming through the multiport you'd care to test. It'll prompt you for a diskette drive with a formatted diskette. It'll prompt you to insert the PCMCIA cards and the parallel and serial connectors. From this point, you can either go back to Test All, which will loop through everything that is attached, or you can go down to a single system to test. For example, the PCMCIA, it will test PCMCIA without cards in place. It tests the internal functions. If everything's all right, you'll get a blue OK insignia underneath a particular system. And once you've finished running diagnostics, you can come out to the restart. It'll prompt you, and you can start it back up. Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about the alternate function key. It's located at the bottom left-hand corner of the keyboard, marked FN. This key works in conjunction with the top two rows of keys on the keyboard. By pressing the FN key by itself, brings the unit out of suspend mode. The function and F1 brings up the configuration utility screen. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. To escape, function F2 brings up a battery system explaining the approximate percentage of battery life left, approximate hours of battery use left in your power mode that you're in right now, and a battery charging condition icon, smiley face indicating that everything's fine. These toggle off and on. Function F3 puts the unit into a temporary standby mode, with enter bringing it out. Function F4 puts it into a suspend mode, which saves the data and then powers it down. The function F5 key turns off the speaker and shows an icon that the speaker's off. And some of the other function keys will turn the hard file on and off, reverse the screen video. Function F12 puts the unit into a hibernate mode. This is a long-term power down mode that is used for long-term shutdown. Now, to control the video, it's controlled to the function home and end keys to bring the brightness of the LCD up. The function insert and delete keys bring the contrast up and down. These are only operational on the STN model. The brightness is controlled automatically on the TFT screen. And also volume control is controlled by the page up and page down. Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about the configuration utility screen. This is the same configuration screen that you can reach through the easy setup screens. To hotkey access, it's function F1. This will bring you into page 1, which concerns power management features, gives you battery status, lets you configure your battery power modes, also gives you your battery status icon again. Some of the power modes, I have it currently in custom mode. There's a high performance mode, medium, and a power saver mode. When AC power is plugged in, it automatically defaults to a high performance mode. We don't necessarily want to change anything. And you'll notice when you do change a configuration, you'll get a black arrow telling you that this has been changed. On page 2 are our video settings, control its output, the brightness. Also, the time and date are set here. Also, down at the bottom is the startup sequence. Currently, it's set to Smart, which is the default sequence. It must be set up in Smart or conventional when you're running diagnostics. So remember that. On page 3, we get into the I/O management. We have another volume control here showing the icon, your keyboard speeds, your active port settings, and your user port settings. And on page 4, we have the system information. It tells you what processor you're running, your RAM, your internal cache, and it also points out here your BIOS level. This is where, during your flash updating, this is where you'll get your current BIOS level. We update the flash through a diskette. It's a standard procedure. It gives you your hard drive size, whether your diskette drive is installed. This is also a good point for a quick check if you're having diskette drive problems, to see if the system is recognizing your diskette drive. All right, and that's the 4 pages of the configuration screen. And if you change any setting, let's change one that doesn't really matter. We'll go ahead and change this down a little bit. You'll get the arrow. When you escape out of the configuration screen, if you've made changes, it'll prompt you to save those changes. If you do, then yes, and you're out of it. Okay, a few notes about flash memory updating. First and most importantly is, do not remove power during the update process. This will destroy the BIOS on the flash module, and you'll have to replace the bottom system board. It requires a fully charged battery inserted into the bottom. Otherwise, you simply insert the diskette into drive A, power on the computer, and follow the menu. Okay, now we're going to start with the teardown of the unit. We're going to go ahead and do it in sequential order. Now, all of these steps aren't necessary, depending on what you're trying to fix. We're going to go ahead and separate the top from the bottom first, then tear down the bottom, and then the top. Tools required for this are a T6 Torx bit and a T1 Torx bit, and some kind of working stick. Now, always remember, all these cards are ESD sensitive, so please wear protection. All right, first things first, we're going to power down the system, which it already is. We're going to remove any of the devices. I'm going to remove the AC. I'm going to go ahead and remove the battery, the hard file, and the PCMCIA connector, remembering that these 3 items are all interconnected. Using a quarter we're not going to get it. Okay, plan B. Okay, to release the battery locking clips at the bottom. And finally, the hard file just gently twists out of place. Okay, we're going to go ahead at this point and remove the memory sim also. It's not necessary unless you're replacing the bottom board, but it's a good time to go ahead and show it. The SIM connector, the SIM door is on the bottom. It's a simple twist. Releasing the two latches. And the SIM comes out at about a 30-degree angle. Now at this time I want to show you there are two pads in here for removing the customer's password. Should you receive a unit in that is password protected, you can clear this password by shorting out these two pads. They're located right between the DIMM connector and the edge of the cover. They're two silver pads that are marked R87. I'll show you those better when we get the bottom board out. Okay, using the T6 Torx driver, first we're going to go ahead and remove the keyboard cover. I might make a note at this point that there are 8 different sizes, 8 different lengths of the T6 screw. So a little bit of screw management, it will be very helpful. I have a tray that I keep them in. I keep them grouped by whatever part I'm removing. First we're going to start with the keyboard cover. There's 2 screws, one right above the Kensington lock slot. The second one is on the bottom, on the left-hand side as it's facing up. Now all these screws are torqued down at about 2.5 inch-pounds, which is not much more than finger tight. You can remove the screws. Now these other 5 screws are for the keyboard. We're going to go ahead and remove those now while we have the unit turned upside down. And now we're ready to remove the keyboard. Turn the unit over, open it up all the way. Now the keyboard cover has 4 locking clips as well, located at about this position. What we're going to want to do is gently lift the right side, and with a gentle rocking back and forth motion, try to release the clips. If it becomes difficult, you can manually close the keyboard, keeping the LCD all the way open. You can turn it on its side and release the locks here and here with your insertion tool. Usually it's more difficult because you have to move the body all around. So anyway, you continue rocking, you can hear the locking clips release, and the keyboard cover is removed. From this point, we need to remove the keyboard. We've already taken the 5 screws off the bottom. There is 1 screw in the back underneath the right hinge area. Now right now this is a Torx head screw. Eventually I believe it's going to be changed to a Allen head so we can use a ball driver. You have to reach this at a slight angle, but it's not too difficult as long as you're aware of it. Go ahead and remove this back screw. And now, the 4 front T1 screws. Remove the 4 screws in the front. I removed the center two first and then the outside. Now, these screws are delicate. They're torqued in at 0.5 inch-pounds, which is not much. That's about fingertip tight. Okay, now at this point, the keyboard is loose, but before you remove it, I'm going to show you there are 5 locking clips. Actually, there's 7 locking clips that help hold the keyboard in place. I'm going to manually close it and show you. There are 2 clips located above the diskette drive opening. There are 3 locking clips, one located at each upright and one in the back here. And there's also 2 clips across the front. In order to clear these clips, we need to lay the unit out flat. Grabbing the unit by the front, push backwards slightly to clear the clips, lift it up, and bring it forward about 1 inch and set it down. At this point, it exposes the 3 ZIF connectors for the 3 keyboard cables. The track point cable is the smallest one, and the other 2 keyboard cables. Remove the track point cable as soon as possible to avoid stress on it. That gives you a little more room and a little more clearance. Go ahead and with equal pressure on each side, open the ZIF connectors and gently remove the flat cables. That removes the keyboard. Okay, now, at this point, we're going to go ahead and separate the top LCD section from the bottom. Now, this step isn't always necessary. It does make for a better working environment, and we're going to go ahead and show the procedure. But if you're at this point and you're just replacing a top card or even the LCD, it's not necessary. But, like I say, we're going to go ahead and do it. Okay, the first things you want to do is separate the microphone, and while you're there, let's do the speaker cable also. Remove the microphone cable and the speaker cable. Now the top card is marked speaker and microphone, so it's, you know, just keep track of it. Let's remove the LCD flat cable, sliding the ferrite up out of the way, and with equal pressure on both sides, gently work the connector loose. And then pushing up on the ferrite and grabbing at the bottom removes the cable. Go ahead and remove the ferrite to get it out of your way. All right, the last thing is the LCD backlight cable. You need to bring it out from behind, gently but firmly, just remove it from the inverter card. Okay, so we're separated. Let's go ahead and close the top. On the back, we're going to remove the 4 screws holding the hinge to the bases. Oops. First, we're going to change back to our T6 driver. Now, making sure that the front latches are released, remove the top. We'll be tearing that apart later. And now we're down to the base section. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is separate the top system board from the bottom system board. The inverter card is attached to the top system board and comes out as a unit. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is to once we're at this point, is to gently lift up on the right side of the system. This allows you a little clearance. At the battery slot, there's a notch to slide in your stick. Now there's a board connector in between here. It's about this long. We want to gently pry the two boards apart. We want to separate these two aluminum spacers in the back. The two spacers are here and here. Sometimes these are stuck in fairly tight. Just try to be careful not to put too much sideward pressure. And now, rotating the top card towards the parallel port, lift up the inverter card and the top card together, removing the IR window, and gently lift out. Okay, let's go ahead and remove the inverter card to prevent any damage. And that is basically the top card removal. You'll notice that one of these spacers attached to the top and the bottom, they'll go either way. Just make sure they're back in place. Okay, from this point, let's go ahead. This is the standby battery. It's taped into place. If you're replacing the top card, let's go ahead and remove the standby battery. Also, on the new top card, if it does not already have these rubber spacers in place, go ahead and you can reuse the old spacers. Just stick them on the new card in the same location. There should be 4 on the bottom, 4 on the top. Okay, now we're down to the bottom board. The bottom board is held in with 3 screws, one right below where the LCD cable is, and the other 2 are back on the multi-port connector. To remove them, there's no particular order in removal. Now with the 3 screws removed, what you want to do is the phone jack on the modem connector is out flush with the base. So you want to bring that in so it'll clear the base. Lift up on the front end. Now this is also slightly adhesive taped in. There's a ground shield on the base that is stuck to the PCMCIA slots. You'll need to clear those. And there's also a little bit of adhesive around the connector port, but otherwise it should just freely slip out. The modem connector is attached to the back. Just gently pry at the connector to remove it. The modem also has an adhesive gasket to help keep it in place during assembly. And here's the bottom board. A few notes on the bottom board. Reuse the PCMCIA slots. They're only held in with 2 nut and bolt type screws. The only other thing that I can think of on the bottom card is this rubber spacer laid in beside the LCD cable. What we found was happening was that the LCD ferrite would sometimes short against these pins, so this prevents that. Otherwise, the bottom card. Right. One other item on our bottom card, the password removal pads that we talked about earlier. We can get a little better view of them. They're right here below the memory SIM connector, right above the R87 indicator. All right, now we're down to the base cover. What comes with the base assembly are the memory door, the battery latches, this access door, and the modem insulator. Okay, what does not come with the base are the speaker and its gasket, the PCMCIA ground shield, as well as the hinge supports on the right and the left. These items can be reused from the old base should you be replacing the base. They're held in with double-sided sticky tape. The speaker itself has a field replaceable part number. Otherwise, there's also a modem connector door. Any or all of this can be reused as needed. And that's the base assembly. Okay, now we can move on to the top, the LCD assembly. Okay, an important note on the top is the routing of the backlight and microphone cables. We'll get into that in the hardware maintenance manual. It shows a specific detailed drawings on how they're routed. I'll show you as best as I can how it's done. It's a fairly simple top. The first thing we'll need to do is remove the screws for the keyboard opening cam. They're two 8mm screws. All of the screw sizes are also described very well in the maintenance manual. Their locations are pointed out. Having taken these apart several times, I've pretty much got it memorized, so I just use a generic screw box here. After removing the keyboard cam, remove the 4 screws for the LCD bezel. Right now the bezel has locking clips across the front and the side and the back. It also has double-sided adhesive tape across the front and the sides. So the first thing you're going to want to do is try to get the tape separated and release the locks in the front. This is a fairly flexible piece, so you can flex it a little bit. Try to work one corner up. And working the second corner up, and remove the latches and the springs with the bezel. Now these latches and springs are just they're held together by the top cover, so if you're not careful, they'll go flying. I'll go ahead and take one apart to show you. It's basically just spring held in place, and otherwise it just falls right out. So be careful, they will end up on the floor. We'll set that there for now. Okay, at this point, we're going to go ahead and want to remove the microphone and the microphone shield. It just simply lifts out. This protective sleeve is very important. This is part of what we'll be talking about later. But basically, as best as you can, go ahead and remove it. From this point, gently lift the LCD out. It's a self-contained unit. The connector is just a standard connector. And there it is, completely torn apart. All right, now we're ready to start our reassembly. A few notes. The T6 screws take a 2.5 inch-pound torque. The T1 screws are a 0.5 inch-pound. Now the hardware maintenance manual has detailed sections on the internal microphone and sleeve, the LCD assembly, backlight cable routing, the top system board, and the memory DIMM. We're going to start with the top LCD assembly. Now this particular LCD is a TFT LCD And remember, the quickest way to check is the upper left-hand screw. If it's up in the corner, it's a TFT screen. If it's down about a ½ inch, it's an STN screen. Now, on the TFT screens, there are some 921,000 thin film transistors, and a small number of these transistors being bad is normal. There's a chart in the disassembling the LCD section in the hardware maintenance manual that describes this in detail. So now that we've decided that we've got a TFT screen, let's go ahead and start by attaching the flat cable to the back. It's just a simple single snap. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and set the LCD into the top cover. And now, this is important, is the microphone and backlight cable routing. It's important not to twist these wires. It's important to bring them out straight. This is our microphone sleeve that protects both sets of wires. First, we're going to want to insert it onto the microphone cable. Then we're going to want to insert the cable and the sleeve onto the backlight cable. The brown wire first, and then the yellow wire. And now what you want to end up with is the microphone cable on the bottom, the LCD cable on the top. Now, from this point, bring your sleeve up and your microphone in more or less together. Get your microphone into place while you're working your sleeve into the slot. Now what you should end up with is your microphone cable on the bottom, your LCD cable coming out of the LCD, turning right without twisting, and coming straight out. Okay, at this point, without really disturbing anything, let's go ahead and put the bezel on. Okay, let's make sure that the bezel has the latches in place with the springs, with the arrows pointing towards the outside of the system. Okay, to install the bezel, hook the front of the bezel into position. And as you draw it down, gently push it up. Make sure your cables are clear. Basically drop down. Make sure your 3 notches in the back are locked in. There's also another one under here. And install the 4 screws. Be careful, try not to scratch the bezel with your screwdriver. It's a little bit tight. Now before I tighten down any of these screws, I always make sure that the LCD is aligned. There's a little bit of play. If you need to, just slide it out. And now we're going to install the keyboard bezel. The keyboard cam. Okay, it just slides into place. It's held in. The 2 screws. 2 screws go through the left hinge into the keyboard cam. One thing I'd like to mention about the left hinge is that the left hinge is part of the top cover assembly. It does not come off, so if there's a bad left hinge, you're going to need to replace the entire top cover assembly. I mean, the entire top cover. The right hinge is replaceable by removing these two screws, and the hinge just pops out. Right now, finally, wrap your LCD cable once around from behind, and for the time being, tape it into place out of the way. And that completes the top section. We're ready to go ahead and do the base. Now the base section should have in place the battery latch and spring, the on-off slide switch, the left and right hinge supports, the speaker in the place with the wires positioned at about 1 o'clock, the modem shield, and the ground shield. Now the ground shield is connected to the left and the right hinge assemblies with adhesive tape, and also it will stick to the PCMCIA slots on these two connectors. All right, so let's go ahead with the installing of the bottom card. First, on the bottom card, let's go ahead and install the modem. Make sure the modem has the gasket positioned over this T1 transformer. It's mostly just to hold the modem in place until it's assembled. With the connectors, attach the connector. Okay, also, there again, if you're, as I mentioned before, if you're replacing the bottom board, reuse the PCMCIA slots, the rubber spacer, and also put a piece of insulator tape across the C107 capacitor. Now it's ready to be installed. Okay, to install it, let's clear our speaker wire out of the way for now. Sliding the back into the multi-port connector and into the right-hand hinge slot. Push the card towards the back of the unit. Now with the adhesive in place, sometimes it tries to stick, so just make sure it seats properly. And as it slides into place, the hard file connector will drop down into its slot. And make sure the modem connector pops out. Now that it's in, let's go ahead and run the fasteners for it. Here again, there's 3 screws holding the bottom in. It's recommended, to ensure that the alignment is proper, to put 1 screw in the back docking connector first. The second screw into the LCD cable area. And then the second screw into the docking connector. All right, at this point, you want to make sure that your 2 aluminum spacers are either in your bottom card or in your top card. In this particular case, we have 1 in each, as long as they're there. And if you do forget them, you can slip them into their position after the cards are together. It's just much easier this way. Okay, on the top board. Now there is a procedure in the maintenance manual to describe it, but briefly, what you want to make sure is that your rubber spacers are in place, your standby battery is in place and taped in, and that the spring, the on-off spring switch, is in position with the spring in place. Now what you're going to want to do on the base is to make sure that your on-off slide switch is all the way towards the front of the unit, that your speaker wire is out of your way temporarily. Okay, we're going to go ahead and insert the inverter card onto the top board from this position. Now we're going to pivot the top card into place. What you're going to want to do is take the floppy parallel connector, slide it into position, engaging the top switch as you go, guiding the battery connector into place as you gently work it down, then guiding your inverter card into the two slots at the bottom of the base. At this point, you can install the infrared window. I normally choose to leave it until everything's seated. Okay, once you know your inverter is cleared of everything, gently push on the board-to-board connector area to seat the cards. Never push on this area without the modem being installed or without the modem filler plug. Trying to push here without that support is going to damage the cards. So once we've seated the cards properly, let's again make sure our inverter card is in its slots. You can go ahead and install the infrared window now with the notch out. I don't know if you can see that. With the notch out facing down, it just clips on to the IR window and then slides down into place. Okay, now make sure your two aluminum spacers are lined up. Pop those in. They're just kind of a pressed fit into place. Make sure your window isn't giving you a lot of trouble. And at this point, make sure your on-off switch works. Make sure it's engaged and it springs freely. Okay, at this point, we can go ahead and install the speaker wire so we don't forget for later. Okay, so our system's together. Got the base section. Now, we'll want to go ahead and attach the LCD assembly to the base section. What we're going to want to do is being careful not to tear up the cables. We're going to want to align the hinge to the guide pins. I don't know if you can see in here, there's a guide post on each side. The hinge is guided straight in. I'm going to have to do this sitting down so it aligns properly. Then we'll attach our hinge screws. All right. Let's open up the unit. go ahead and install our ferrite core and install our LCD cable. At this point, again, make sure that your LCD cable is wrapped around from behind and it's coming out the bottom. If it's not, it can be worked in at this point, but you have to be real careful not to tear it or bend it. So let's install the ferrite. Now, before installing this LCD cable, make sure your connectors are all the way wide open. Bring this around this way just a little bit. Need a guide stick. Trying to do this so you can see it here. Draw the cables back and slide them in. Now on these 0 connectors, work them back and forth so you don't pinch the edge of the cables. Make sure they're seated completely and slide your ferrite core down. Okay. Now, the backlight connector and microphone wires. All right, so now we're coming out of the LCD assembly untwisted. What we're going to want to do, eventually the microphone is going to wrap down the inverter card into here. But for now, we need to get it out of our way. Just pull it out to the back. It seems to be the best. Go ahead and install the cable plug first into the back of the connector. Now, loop the microphone cable through to get it out of our way. Okay, let's go ahead and install the microphone plug and clean these wires up. Okay, the speaker and the microphone wires just tuck in between the inverter card and the PCMCIA slots. Try not to kink them, but basically they just lay in between. Okay, the microphone, when it's finished, should be laying across the inverter card at about this position. You don't want the microphone cables hanging out the side here because you can potentially view from the end. Okay, now the LCD backlight cable routing, which is detailed in the maintenance manual. Follow the procedure, but basically what it tells you to do is, without twisting the cables, run the 2 lines over top of the connector and tuck the loops down between the inverter card and the back of the machine without getting them inside the inverter card insulator, so that they basically end up laying on top of the connector and then looping down beside the LEDs. That should provide enough free clearance for opening and closing without putting any pressure, any binding on there. All right, at this point, we are ready to install the keyboard. The keyboard, again, we can't talk enough about this keyboard. It has the locking clips we talked about on the keyboard are positioned here, here, and here, and also one back here. Now they coincide with these locking clips here and also under these uprights. It's a little bit tricky, but it can be done. First thing we want to do is install the 3 connectors, doing the big keyboard connectors first. finally the track point connector into position and lock it down. Okay. Now, guide the back of the keyboard into the openings. Gently pushing down and draw it forward. At this point, I always manually close the keyboard and check to make sure that I've engaged the locking clips here. And here. This all looks flat, so I know I'm good. Okay, at this point, first thing you're going to want to do is install this back right-hand keyboard screw. It's a 5mm short T6 screw. For me, I use a pair of tweezers. Get it into the hole. See if I can show that a little better. And start off by just tightening it a little bit. It's just to help hold the keyboard in place. Now the important thing is not to put too much pressure on these 4 screws in the front. These are T1 screws at 0.5 inch-pounds. And I'm going to use my hand driver because it's easier to control. Okay, I start with the 2 center screws. Sometimes you have to adjust the keyboard left or right just a little bit to align it. Here again, I don't tighten these screws until I've got all of them into place. And I always finish with the screw on the right. Because the screw on the right is the most vulnerable. Go ahead and remember to go back, tighten them up. Say fingertip tight is all these are. Yes, you can strip them. Yes, you can break them. Remember that. All right. Now also, remembering to go back and tighten up this screw in the back. Okay. Now, before we install the remaining 5 screws for the keyboard, let's go ahead and install the keyboard cover, and we'll take care of all that in the bottom. Okay, the keyboard cover has 4 locking clips as well as the 2 screws that we took off. These 4 locking clips lock into the base in the back as well as onto the keyboard behind the cam closure. Okay, with the unit all the way open and making sure that your backlight cable routing is correct. There's not much clearance. You gently insert it, kind of leaning towards the back to clear the IR window. Gently snapping it into place. Okay, now at this point you're going to have to be careful because you're going to need to close the top to get to the screws on the bottom. But if the keyboard cover is not seated, it's going to catch on the LCD. Be careful or you'll rip this end off. I always kind of hold it bring it in together. Let's go ahead and flip it over. Okay, the screw pattern, like I say again, it's spelled out in the maintenance manual. I happen to know that for this, the 16mm screw starts there. The 10mm screw is in the middle. The 8mm screw is on the end. And that the 3 remaining screws are 6mm screws. They're the same size. So we'll go ahead and slide these in. Okay, let's go ahead and tighten all this up. The screw for the keyboard cover on the right side. Okay, at this point we're into the final assembly, reinstalling the memory DIMM. The DIMM is notched to fit only one way. Slides in at about a 30-degree angle. And then gently push down to lock it into place. Placing the door just snaps in. Finally, let's go ahead and install the rest of our devices. In this case, hard file first. Just gently slides in. Battery. Being careful, don't just slap the battery in. Try to gently set it in and make sure it seats. The PCMCIA cover. It is also interlocked to the hard file. It just pivots into place, snaps in. And also the floppy drive cover. This is just a rubber cover. Has an interlocking mechanism. Mainly, we just kind of squeeze it into the position. Then lock it down. And then what we want to do is power it on, verify that the keyboard cam mechanism is working. Want to go ahead and power it on, verify operation, and then remember to reset the customer configuration. And that concludes the teardown and rebuild of the 2630. Now, one other note, to clean the LCD, we use a mixture of rubbing alcohol and water, a 50-50 solution. It seems to do best on the LCD. It also works well on the cover. Just rub it in a horizontal motion and then dry it off afterwards using a soft cloth. Please don't use any paper type products on the LCD. It will scratch them. And that concludes the reassembly of the 701s.
Thanks, Ken, for the overview on the exciting new ThinkPad 701. Entire LCD replacement is no longer necessary to resolve hinge-related problems on the ThinkPad models 700C or 720C. Mark Fowler from our EasyServe team is now standing by, ready to share with us the latest hinge replacement procedure.
I'm here to show you the latest service procedure for replacing the hinge assembly on the ThinkPad model 700C and 720C. Hinge problems may show up as binding hinges, which would make opening the cover difficult, such as this. This may also cause cracks in the case in this area here. On the other hand, loose hinges would cause the LCD assembly to fall. To resolve this problem, IBM has made individual hinges available rather than replacing the entire LCD assembly. To start the hinge replacement, you want to make sure that you're properly ESD protected. Next, you'd want to remove the battery and the hard drive. Next, you want to open the LCD and expose the back side to you. Next, we want to remove the LED cover, which is this part here. And using your fingers and your thumb, squeeze and pull it forward to remove it. Next, we want to remove the hinge cover. This will expose the screws and give you access to them. Next, we remove the LED assembly by unscrewing the screw behind it. Next, we need to remove the ground clip screw. Next, we need to remove the two screws that hold down the hinges. Next, you want to remove the screw cover caps on the back. And then remove the 4 screws, 2 per hinge. Next, we want to remove the video cables. Simply just unplugging them. Careful not to pull the wires out. Now this one is a little more difficult. In order to get this one off and to keep from tearing the video ribbon, there's a white block here you need to hold down on. Using your probe to hold it down. You have to get a good grip and pull it free. Now you're ready to remove your LCD assembly. Next, we need to put the hinges in a horizontal position. Now we're going to remove the screw covers. So one per hinge. And then you have one at each corner on the LCD. To remove these, take a flathead screwdriver, a small one preferred, and puncture this plug and lift it out. And these just simply flip out. Now to remove these screws, you need a Bristol wrench. Now we have 4 screws exposed. Simply remove them. Now to remove the back cover, you want to gain entry from the back and not the front up here. And to do this, you take your probe and in this area you want to cause a larger seam by taking your thumb and pushing upward. Next, you can finish separating the case using your probe. Make sure you're careful when lifting out the LCD that you don't break off the tabs. Now we'll remove the hinges. The hinges are fastened down with 2 machine type screws. Remove the long one first. Both of them are different sizes, so you want to make sure that you get the correct size back in the proper hole. Also, we have a shield here. It's an insulator. It needs to be removed. Okay, now the hinges are ready to be taken out. Just gently lift up the hinge, slide it out. This one you need to pay special attention to. There's a power strip just on the inside. You want to make sure that you do not damage it. Now we're ready to put the new hinges in. Starting with the right side. Lift up a little bit. Make sure it's seated well. The other side we want to do the same thing, keeping in mind the power strip. And replacing the insulator. start with a small screw, the two. Doesn't take much strength. Just hand tighten it. You don't really have to torque down. Now the other side. Now your hinge kit will come with 2 other insulators per hinge. You need to make sure that you get those on there as well. They're attached with adhesive. Next, you want to exercise your hinge. You can do this by turning the unit back over. You want to make sure that the hinge you're replacing is not defective. Okay. We're ready to put the assembly back to its case. Something you want to keep in mind, you want to align this opening with these tabs here. These are very important that you do not break those off. Do that, just lift the assembly above it. Once aligned, you can drop it in. And the rest of the assembly should fall into place. You want to make sure that you get it fastened back together properly. Now you're ready to replace the screws back into the hinge and the top of the LCD. Okay, now that the screws are in, we can replace the screw covers. And these plugs have to line up with notches. They can be difficult to install. And remount the LCD assembly back onto the ThinkPad. Make sure you get the hinges in the proper holes. Make sure they're aligned properly. starting with the back screws. Put those in first. Next we'll put in the top screws. Now before placing the hinge cover caps back on, we want to put on the caps for the back screw covers first. Next we want to put the video cables back in. It's a lot easier to put them back in if you open up the LCD first. Next, we want to screw back down the video ground clip. Replace the hinge cover caps. Next, you need to reinstall the LED assembly. Next, we'll replace the LED cover. We'll make sure that you align these tabs with these notches on the keyboard frame. Now, this can be very difficult to reinstall. These front tabs are pretty durable. The back ones are delicate. We'll make sure that you don't break them off. If you do, you have to replace this part. Check to make sure that the wires are clear in the back before you finish snapping it down. Now you want to make sure the hinges function properly, which they do. And that completes our hinge replacement for the 700C and the 720C.
Thanks, Mark, for sharing with us the hinge replacement service procedure. If you have technical questions concerning the topics covered in this video, please call your IBM Support Center for assistance. Product update videos are designed to complement the formal service training series courses and contain new product information that may not have been available when the formal courses were created. We hope the topics presented were of value to you. Thanks for sharing your time with us.